Okay, good morning, guys. Today we're supposed to have two presentations. One by Leif talking about Vaadin 7.4, one by Mark talking about the designer. And Leif is on vacation and Mark won't be presenting today. So you're stuck with me.
Yay.
What do you want to know?
Designer.
Wrong answer. You want to know about 7.4. And grid. Who knows what features there are in grid? I think they have been presented a couple of times. You don't count, and you probably don't know either, even though you have made them.
Correct.
So I don't have any slides. I'll just show you some code, what you can do with 7.4. And then you can ask questions if you have any. So here we have a Vaadin application. Might look familiar. We have the list of persons that you always have. Person today is pretty standard being containing some basic stuff, first name, last name, ID, age. Contains gender, happens to be an enum. It contains a salary, big decimal, and then also a subbean, the address, which again contains basic stuff, but more or less to show that we have all kinds of different types here. And we also have this Boolean busy that you always have in your database. So what will happen if we start using this with grid? Well, first, if you're familiar with table, you know you want to wrap this into a container so you can use it in the grid. So create a bin item container and throw the container to grid and do nothing else. So what do we get out? We get something that looks very nice like this. So it's production ready. We might have to tune it a bit. I mean, okay. There are some good things and some bad things here. Some things grid does automatically, right? Like making nice headers for us. We don't have the property IDs directly. Instead, it tries to make them human-friendly, like first name. It doesn't try to do anything automatically with the data. Well, at least not with the address. It uses converters to format the other data, so they should look nice. Like the salary, well, actually wouldn't want it that way, but that's the default you get anyway. And there's a couple of problems here. You don't want to have the columns in this order and so on and so on. So let's see what we can do about this and how we would do it with grid. We all know how to do it with table. Henrik.
Why doesn't grid show a boolean as a checkbox by default?
You should ask the designer.
He's on vacation.
Excellent. So, moving on. So actually, well, grid shows everything as text by default. That's the way it is. But anyway, okay, so we have the address. We can expand the address, get the individual properties. This is basic container stuff. What's grid is capable of, still the property ID you would get for city here, for instance, is address.city, which is shown here as city directly. So you don't necessarily have to tune that. For the column order, you have this strange method called setColumnOrder, to which you give property IDs, and then they will appear in that order. This differs slightly from table, because if we here in the column order list, some of the properties we will actually see, for instance, ID is not listed here in the column order. We'll still see ID in the grid. So the column order, it's not visible columns, it's just the column order. The remaining columns will go to the right. And so if we want to remove the ID, we would actually remove the column from the grid. In table, it's more like we hide the property. And some people find it strange that is it really hidden or is it just hidden so that you can't see it? So does it end up in the client or not? Well, here we remove the whole column because the column is mapped to a property ID. If we remove the column, there's nothing going to the client. It's just then data in the container. So now we have something we could maybe use for something, first name, last name, age, gender, and so on. Okay, pretty basic stuff. The sizes here is probably not what you want. In table, you have the options of setting the width of a column or setting the expand ratio for a column. Surprise, surprise, we can do pretty much the same stuff here. So for configuring column in grid, you would always start by getting the column, getting the object representing the column. So you can use that then to configure, well, if you look at what kind of setters there are, there's quite a lot of stuff you can do per column. But for instance, we can expand the street address by setting the expand ratio for that, and we will get a wider street address. Woohoo! That's what you could do in table also. So what we can't do in table is what we have here, for instance, set minimum width and set maximum width for a column. So if we want to expand the street address, but we want to make sure that our salary can still grow, they look a bit small here. So we want to reserve some extra space for that. We can set the minimum width for the salary column to be something a bit more, so we can still negotiate about that. And of course, we can combine this for all the columns. Talking about data in the grid, as I said, we always render it as text. Actually, we don't have to render it as text. We can render it as, well, anything we like. The kind of data flow in the grid goes such that you have the container, it contains the data in some format with some type. And then you have the renderer, which is responsible for actually updating the DOM, showing the data on the screen. And then you have a converter between these two if the types of these don't match. So what we can do, for instance, in this grid, is we could go to the salary column and use the built-in progress bar renderer by setting the renderer for that column. And what would this give us if we use a progress bar renderer for the salary column? Well, apparently a null pointer exception. Well, that was unexpected. Oh, this looks much better. So we get not a null pointer exception, but we get an exception because we are using a progress bar renderer which expects a double for a column which has a big decimal. So this is where we need a converter so we can convert between the two types, so we don't have to change the renderer to deal with a big decimal. Instead, we can just plug in a converter that goes between big decimal and double, basically by doing value, double value. Pretty simple stuff. So if we go back and restart the server, we will see this nice grid where everybody has full salary, which is nice, of course. So the problem here basically is that progress bar render is defined so that it renders something between 0 and 1. And our salary is between 0 and 10,000 here. So, well, everybody who has a salary higher than €1 will get full salary, visualized like this. So, well, doesn't make that much sense, so we can instead scale this down in the converter as we're changing between the format of the container to the format of the renderer. So 10,000 in the container would then be converted to one for the renderer. And then we will get like the progress of the salary. The goal is to get 10,000, and we can see how far everybody is. Actually, Minna Virki is quite high on the salary scale. Almost there. All right, so, well, what else can we do? We have this busy column here, which is rendered as true and false, and actually doesn't even fit in the column right now, so it's not that nice. We could maybe render it as checkboxes. That would be one idea. Let's not do that. Another thing we can do with renderers is, well, let's do a converter for this Boolean column. So it's basically we extend the string to Boolean converter. Instead of converting to true and false, we convert to a font awesome icon, which we then hack so we can get a different color of the icon based on whether the value is true or false. So this would be, well, converter, it outputs HTML instead of the true false. So we go back to our grid, and then we have a nice indicator here for busy, except it's HTML, of course. So we have to still change the default text renderer to do an HTML renderer if we do it this way. So then when we go back to the grid, we have the busy column rendered as icons of different colors instead. Yeah. The one icon you can see there, it has a color. All right, more grid features. We can enable the internal editor of the grid by setting editor enabled to true. When we have the editor enabled, it means we can double click on a row and we get an editor for the row. Basically built upon a field group and a field factory, which generates fields, suitable fields for each column in the grid. So we can then go here and edit Sauli Paul. So Sauli Paul is maybe Sauli Pauli. And we have, it works pretty much like, well, any form field group, except it's inside the grid this way. So one thing, of course, if we change the salary to something like this, we might have a small problem because there's a validation error and it will be shown this way. You see that this here is red, and then it will actually show the error message down here below, so you know that something is wrong. So it will find the first column that has a problem and show that you should fix that problem. And then, well, then you go and fix the problems and you can save again. Now this is the default error handler. If you want to do something different, you could set your own editor error handler here, which will handle this commit error coming from the grid. So if we would do something like this, we will get the error instead as a notification. And then we get this really informative message here, you're doing it wrong. But this way we can change the behavior, what happens when we save. All right, so we can also see that the renderers are actually not related to this editor in any way. So we're editing the value in the database. We're not editing the progress bar that we see on the screen. So no matter what renderer we use, this editor will still be the same. Some more features. We have frozen columns. The API for using frozen columns is this very complex set frozen column count, where you give the number of columns that you want frozen. And well, if you have a grid sized like this, you can't really see the frozen columns, but here we see, woo, we have 2 frozen columns. Now there's another way also of deciding where you want this split point to be. So you can do grid get column last name and set last frozen column for that column. Because this operation of calculating between this last name column and the column count is so difficult, this actually doesn't work in this version. So wait for 7.4.1, there you can use this other API. And so let's not try that one. Let's instead have a look at headers and footers. We have this API called add header row at, which you can use to add a header row. And then you have to remember to also import stuff, or it won't work. So if we add a header row, we'll get an empty header row, in this case above the default header row. So what we can do with this is, for instance, we can join columns together, so like making call spans by doing row.join, giving the property IDs that we want to join together. This will actually give us a new header cell that we can then, for instance, set the text for. So we can join first name, last name, and name it full name. Makes sense, no? Now the difference between this extra header row and the default header row is that default header row will sort when you click on it, and well, any extra header row will not have this functionality. In addition to setting the text for this header cell, you can also set HTML for it. If you want something like a bold full name, very bold move. Or you can also put components in the header. I'm going to cheat a bit here, doing filter row add to my grid, which will, oops. Add a set of text fields in another header row, which I can use to filter the grid. I'll not go through the code for doing the filtering, but it's pretty straightforward. Basic Vaadin filtering. But it's quite easy to find all the old employees, for instance. And it uses the same field factory and everything as the editor row, so you get stuff like selects for enums and so on, more or less for free. And well, footer works in a similar way. Just append a footer row. By default, you don't have any footer. And you can just find a cell, join cells, or do whatever you like. You can also set style names for individual cells if you want to make something this ugly. So then it's quite handy. Okay, selection. There's selection by default. We have single selection in the grid. We can actually deselect by clicking. Somebody had a problem with this. It was not possible in one version. Now you can deselect by clicking. If you talk about selection and think about table versus grid, we can see that when we navigate with the keyboard here, the keyboard focus is actually a different thing from selection. So in table, you would always move the selection. Here you move the focus, and then you can use space to select or deselect a row. Or, well, with the mouse you just click to select.
So does it work also with the keyword multiple select?
34 seconds, I'll answer. So Grid has different selection modes. Actually, they're built upon something called a selection model, but let's not go into that. Grid has 3 selection modes: none, multi, and single. Well, if we do none, then we can't select. Very strange. Single, you just saw. If we set it to multi, then we will actually get a new column here with checkboxes, which you can use to do multi-selection. You can also do it with a keyboard, so in the same way as before with space you would select or deselect.
Can you get rid of those checkboxes?
No, you can't. Grid says you can't. I guess you can make your own selection model, which doesn't have the checkboxes, but this is the default. So you have checkboxes for multi-selection, no checkboxes for single selection. You also have this select all checkbox in the header, which is apparently the most critical feature in all grids everywhere. And as a special feature, you can also drag select multiple rows here. So instead of clicking everybody individually, you can just click and drag and get a few selected. No, you can't shift select. That makes no sense. Let's not do that. I can't do that.
Okay, probably somebody has changed it.
Okay. This is pretty much what you can do with Grid in 20 minutes. There are some other stuff in 7.4 than Grid also. Let's say you want to make something as strange as you don't want the editor row, but you want to have a form. You want to have a form where you can edit your data. So you would have something very nice like this. And you want it so that, well, you probably want a selection model other than multi for this. So when we click something, we can edit it here. Yeah, very cool. It has been in Vaadin forever. What's the difference in 7.4? Well, one difference is that it's actually possible to, in a sensible way, get the validation error message. So you can find out what actually failed in your form or your field group when the user saves and you want to show something to the user. So previously, you would have, well, you would have had this same thing. You would not have had the code here, and then you would have an commit exception which has a cause, which is an invalid value exception from the field group, which has some causes, which are probably the invalid value exceptions from the individual fields that you might be able to use for something. What 7.4 adds is basically to this commit exception here a method get invalid fields. So you get a map of invalid fields and exceptions caused when validating them. So what you can do is, for instance, like here, grab the first field and show something like the caption of the field and then the message from the exception, so that it would work like this. Of course, you can grab all of them and show them in a message somewhere or whatever you want to do. There are some other minor changes also. For instance, if I deselect a row here, it actually clears the for the fields automatically, which it didn't do in 7.3. So if you have a field group and set the data source to null, it will actually clear the fields and kind of go back to the state it was before you set the data source. So it will work in a more sensible way. To get this, there's also a few new methods in abstract field. There's clear and there's isEmpty, which are new public methods for this. So if clear means something else than set value null in your field, just override it and do something else. Okay, yeah, you can also set the caption in 7.4. It's a nice new feature. You can set the caption, for instance, to something like this. And then we can say, actually, it should be HTML, the caption. And then it will render the caption as HTML. Also kind of basic stuff. Could have been there 10 years ago. Wasn't. Now it is there. 3 minutes. There's a few other things new in 7.4, except for this. Well.